This is Melissa, and today is the 25th of January, 2026. I hope that everyone is doing all right. If you are in a cold climate, I hope you're well and you have power and plenty of food. Here, I've got a freezing rainstorm, an ice storm, I guess you could call it. It's kind of a rarity here in Texas. Certainly had plenty of those in Canada. But it's been a mix of light snow and then sleet and freezing rain all day long. And right now it's pelting heavy, freezing precipitation. And you can hear it. There's nothing I can do about that. I want to thank those of you who ordered last week. I appreciate the orders very much. It has helped me. I'm going to say again that if you've been thinking about ordering, this week would be a good time to do that. And I've been busy because I did get a couple of orders, and that was helpful. And so I had to print books and write out envelopes, and I loved every minute of that activity. Thank you. I am also catching up on emails. I've been backlogged for so many months, but I've had other projects going, and I haven't prioritized it. And it just, I told someone, I emailed them, and I said, I feel so bad it's taken me so long to respond to you. And they wrote back and said, don't feel bad. Everyone understands, and I hope you do. But I still want to get on top of that situation, because I enjoy hearing from you, and I don't want you to stop communicating, because it takes me so very long to get back to you. I'm going to change that. I'd like to encourage you to use an email address. I've changed the email that is on the front page of the website, and so you'll see that what is listed there now is cuttingthroughthematrix@protonmail.com. And I will, of course, always keep Alan Watt cuttingthrough@yahoo.com. But I want to see if I can kind of streamline where I get mail so that things jump out at me a little bit more easily. I think the Yahoo email address is so old now. I get a lot of things in there that aren't important, and it's harder for me to see what is important. So cuttingthroughthematrix@protonmail.com. Thank you. The Cutting Through books it's great. I've got the latest draft done. The cover of the book is just about complete. I think there's a little handful of typos on one more round. Finish the cover, and it's conceivable that they go to the printer by the end of this month or the 1st of February, a week away. So that is exciting. And then I also want to mention that next Saturday on the 31st is the final book club meeting for Waiting for the Miracle. And that is going to be a recorded conversation about interviews 11 and 12 of part 2. And this has been a really amazing gathering here, week in and week out, every Saturday since May. We've been talking about Waiting for the Miracle. So we'll have a little bit of a break, a little hiatus, and decide what we're doing next. Okay, I think that I'm going to get into Davos here. So that just wrapped up, I believe, on the 24th, yesterday, Saturday the 24th. And so that's where the World Economic Forum meets in Davos, Switzerland. And they were bragging that this meeting that they just concluded had the most CEOs and the most heads of state who showed up. I believe they were saying that 60 heads of state showed up. And that included Donald Trump. And Trump had, he talked about Greenland, didn't say a word about Iran. And he announced the formation of the Board of Peace. And of course, I saw some jokes online that the board was spelled B-O-R-E-D. So much ennui, so much boredom with peace. And that's a much more accurate spelling, I believe. And there was a very interesting speech that was delivered by Mark Carney from Canada. Remember, he was Bank of Canada, Bank of England, or maybe, no, I think it was Bank of England, then Bank of Canada, and now he is the Prime Minister of Canada, taking over from Trudeau. And his speech was, well, it was interesting. He talked about the end of the rules-based order. And I think there's some honesty mixed in there. And you can dissect that. I'll link to that. I actually listened to all of Trump's speech and all of Mark Carney's speech and a few other highlights. And then I did listen to the entire conversation that Elon Musk had with Larry Fink. And this was interesting. Everything that I'm talking about here, I will post, and you can look at that yourself later. And if you are interested in finding out what was said, then I'll supply the links for you. Now, it's interesting, those of you who, the World Economic Forum was a very big part of the whole COVID operation. And you'll know Klaus Schwab in his weird spaceman kind of tunic, and he stepped down with a bit of scandal around him, things that supposedly went on in the workplace that were abusive. But what do you expect from someone who says, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy? And so during COVID, we got the book that I've mentioned quite a bit, which was The Great Reset. So connected to the Great Reset, we heard about how we were going to, now move into what's called a stakeholder economy. And it was the promotion of sustainable development and green growth and ESGs. We're so tired of hearing about all of this. And so really what the Great Reset, what the tenets of the goals outlined in this book were aligning the World Economic Forum's platform with the UN's 2030 agenda, or Agenda 21. And so that's Klaus Schwab. And now who do we have in control of the World Economic Forum? We have Larry Fink. He is the CEO, or the chairman, I believe. Maybe that's what his title is. He's the chairman of the World Economic Forum. So Fink, great name. He is the CEO of BlackRock. BlackRock, some of you will be familiar with them, and they're a global investment management firm, and they are into all kinds of things, including the government-sponsored things like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and some of you who've had student loans may have owed money to those people at some point. And they're into real estate investment in the multifamily, like apartment complexes kind of thing. And so that is now who is heading up the World Economic Forum. And so Elon Musk sat down with Larry Fink and had a very interesting conversation about where they saw things going. And it was, they kind of made a joke when they sat down, because I think that there was something that felt very insider, but I think there must have been something said about Elon Musk had 5 claims to something. And so Larry Fink said to him, okay, how many quotes are you going for? And Elon Musk thought about it for a second, and he said 5. So these would be the quotable statements, the things that all the press would say, well, Elon Musk said this. And so this is from the World Economic Forum site itself from 24 January. Elon Musk at Davos 2026, why technology could shape a more abundant future. Yeah, sure, we know who it's abundant for. So they spoke about transformative technologies. Musk argued that if AI, robotics, and solar power can be deployed more broadly, and I noticed that deployed was a word that they used several times in this, which usually you think of that in conjunction with a military deployment. But if they could deploy this more broadly, then they could unlock an era of unprecedented global abundance. So Musk was talking about, he said, this year in 2026, AI will be smarter than any individual. And he said, in less than 2 years, very, very soon, artificial intelligence will be smarter than all collective intelligence. So that was kind of an interesting statement. He made several interesting statements. He said, we're in a very interesting time in history. But one thing that was interesting was that he was talking about the need to ensure that human consciousness remained. And in this kind of mumbling, weird way, he said that was one of the reasons why he does everything that he does, and that's one of the reasons why he wants to go into space and go to Mars and everything. He said, so I'm like, I don't know. It's the bottom line. I mean, I'm just reading the transcript here that comes up on the side of the YouTube. So I'm like, I don't know. It's the bottom line is I think we need to assume that life and consciousness is extremely rare. And it might be only us. In other words, he's got all these satellites in space and he said, I've got like 9,000 satellites up there, and not once have we had to maneuver around an alien spaceship. So I think we need to assume that life and consciousness is extremely rare, and it might be only us. And if that's the case, then we need to do everything possible to ensure that the light of consciousness is not extinguished, because effectively the way I view it, the image in my mind is of a tiny candle in a vast darkness, a tiny candle of consciousness that could easily go out. And that's why it's important to make life multiplanetary. So if there's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster on Earth, that consciousness continues. That's the purpose of SpaceX. So that was, an interesting comment that he made among many other comments. But it reminded me of a comment that I think is more to the point. Nick Hayes of Hayes Reviews just did his second book interview. The first was some time back, and I confess I haven't caught it yet. But that was with James Corbett, and I don't know the title of James Corbett's book. I'm sorry, Nick, but I can only do so much in the course of a day. But this second interview that he did was with Patrick Wood. And some of you will know that Alan Watt linked to different things from Technocracy News over the past, and Patrick Wood has been at this for a long time, talking about and writing about technocracy and technocratic control. And with Courtney Turner, who has her own podcast, he has written a book, and the name of that book is The Final Betrayal: How Technocracy Destroyed America. And Nick read the book, and then he did an interview with Patrick and Courtney. And it's a very good interview. I did actually leave the book club early this afternoon so that I could have time to watch that interview, and I'm glad that I did. They covered a lot of ground there. And one of the things that they got into is something that I have been researching and listening to and thinking about, what they're calling dark enlightenment. I'm not just focused on dark enlightenment. That's the people like Peter Thiel and the people who are, you might call them right-leaning Silicon Valley billionaires. My own interest is a little bit broader in the philosophies that are underpinning where everything is moving right now. So I'm just, but within that is dark enlightenment, and I was interested to hear this. Like I said, this was a good interview that Nick did. But what Courtney Turner said when asked, what's at stake? What's at stake? She said, just the end of free will. And I, of course, always like to hear people say it like it is. This is what is at stake. And so, yeah, there she said it. That I contrasted to the rah-rah, almost like a self-promotional, self-congratulatory conversation between Elon Musk and Larry Fink. So I'll link it all. I'll put a link up there too for Nick's interview. Well worth seeing. So the Redux that I am playing for you, I will also supply a link for, because I am not going to play the entire talk for you. It is Alan Watt from May 31st, 2020. And because it is in 2020, it's a long talk. And so I am taking the first portion of the talk for you. And I haven't edited it yet, so I'm not sure how long that will be. The title is Post-Democratic World Order Coming into View. Sustainable Austerity, Power Held by the Few. And the reason why I chose this is because it's a good talk and it's worth hearing in its entirety. But Alan gets into these bodies, the United Nations, the United Nations New World Order. This is an article that he mentions right off the bat. The Club of Rome, the World Economic Forum. And he talked a bit about the World Economic Forum and what do these people do. He said at one time you would call them gangs. It was a much better and pleasant term to use. It's very short, gang. Quite easy to understand. And in the gang, you have the leaders of one part of the gang, but it's specialized lieutenants that would deal with other facets. Like, for instance, vaccinations and so on, and the big pharma companies. So he's talking about gangs. And you can't help, when you are looking at people like Larry Fink and Elon Musk and all of these players who show up, and the now retired Klaus Schwab, you're looking at gangsters. You are looking at gangsters. So, who talked about Iran? Did anybody of note talk about Iran at the World Economic Forum? Well, as it turns out, Scott Bessant talked about it. I didn't listen to the full interview that he did, but I listened to a significant portion of it. And I heard him talk openly about how economic statecraft was used against Iran. So who is Scott Bessant? Scott Bessant is the U.S. Treasury Secretary. He is the first openly gay high-level appointment. I mentioned when he was appointed that he was very wealthy, and he had lived in, I think, Charleston, South Carolina, where he owned what was known as the Pink Palace. And he sold it for $22 million or so dollars right around the time that he took his position as the U.S. Treasury Secretary. So he had some very interesting things to say about Iran and destabilizing them. So we've heard, there was just this uprising in Iran, and there were some economic problems, and people took to the streets, and then the women were lighting up cigarettes and burning pictures of the Ayatollah, and so there you go. Now, this is from Press TV, but you can actually, I know. So you can actually just go to the World Economic Forum site and find the video of him talking at Davos. No spin, no nothing, but I wanted it on paper, so I went to find it. So, like I said, there may seem to be a little spin in the article, but if you can hear it right out of his mouth there at Davos, and there's no spin. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has openly acknowledged the role of U.S. sanctions in destabilizing Iran's economy and fueling public unrest. Speaking to Fox News during the World Economic Forum in Davos on Tuesday, Bessent described the sanctions as a form of economic statecraft that had contributed to recent riots in Iran. Bessent said it's worked because in December their economy collapsed. We saw a major bank go under. The central bank has started to print money. There is a dollar shortage. They are not able to get imports. And this is why the people took to the streets. This is economic statecraft. No shots fired. Things are moving in a very positive way here. Okay. I want to point out that Scott Bessent is on a short list to take over the Federal Reserve, chairman of the Federal Reserve, when Jerome Powell steps down, which may be later this year. I'm not sure. Who else is on that short list? Well, someone by the name of Kevin Warsh, and Kevin Warsh is the son-in-law of Ronald Lauder. And he is the billionaire who told Trump, you should take an active interest in Greenland. And I mentioned this last week, and I mentioned that I was going to write an article called War Paint, and I did do that. And in War Paint, I talked a little bit more about who Ronald Lauder was. And I didn't get into Kevin Warsh, but it's quite interesting family there. So those are some of the big highlights of Davos. But before I close, I want to just discuss a little bit about the Board of Peace. Now, I'm going to say that I am usually a little bit more careful about what I say, but I'm just going to come out here on the Board of Peace and put a few things out there for you to consider. The Board of Peace is an organization that was established by President Donald Trump that purports to promote peacekeeping, and it was authorized by United Nations Security Council Resolution 2803 to oversee the resolution's implementation. The board was proposed in September 2025 and formally established in January 2026 on the sidelines of the 56th World Economic Forum. Resolution 2803 welcomed the board to aid with the post-war reconstruction of the Gaza Strip via the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza and authorized it to deploy a temporary peacekeeping force. Critics have argued that the institution bears little resemblance to what was proposed under Resolution 2803. The Guardian described it as a pay-to-play club centered on Trump rather than a Gaza-focused mechanism. As of 2026, 19 states of the 62 invited have signed the board's charter. It has failed to gain support from several European countries. So, all right, let's just go here quickly. I am going to tell you who's on it. So the founding executive board members include Marco Rubio. Now, those of you who follow American politics will know that he is the U.S. Secretary of State. Okay, so here's what I can tell you about Marco Rubio. He is widely described as a staunch Zionist. He has consistently advocated for unconditional support of Israel, including backing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government during and after the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack. He has promoted policies such as lifting sanctions on Israeli settlers, expelling individuals deemed pro-Hamas, and blocking visas for those who criticize Israel. Okay, who else is on this board of peace? Steve Witkoff. All right, what can we know about Steve Witkoff? Steve Witkoff is a billionaire Jewish-American real estate developer and a staunch supporter of Israel, often described as having a warm Zionist Jewish heart. He was appointed by President-elect Donald Trump as his special envoy to the Middle East, despite having no prior diplomatic experience. His pro-Israel stance is well documented. He is a close ally of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, Jared Kushner is on the founding executive board of the Board of Peace. And he is Donald Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor. He is widely described as a Zionist, with both his personal beliefs and professional actions reflecting strong support for Israel. He spearheaded the Abraham Accords. He aligns with pro-Israel agenda that bypassed Palestinian statehood. Critics argue that his approach reflects a far-right Zionist perspective. Tony Blair, former UK Prime Minister, is also on the Board of Peace. He is a staunch supporter of Israel, with multiple sources describing him as a true friend of Israel. His close alignment with Zionist interests is evident throughout his political career, both during and after his tenure as UK Prime Minister. His relationship with the pro-Israel lobby was solidified through figures like Lord Michael Levy, a major fundraiser for the Labour Party, and a prominent Zionist. Okay, that is Tony Blair. I'm sorry, I'm probably slaughtering this man's name, but it's the president of the World Bank, Ajay Banga. And there's no evidence that he is a Zionist, just the president of the World Bank. Mark Rowan. Let's see, who is Mark Rowan? Mark Rowan is a prominent Zionist and billionaire investor who has become a leading voice among Jewish donors advocating for strong support of Israel and combating what he describes as anti-Semitism on U.S. college campuses. As CEO of Apollo Global Management, Rowan has used his financial influence to pressure institutions he believes tolerate anti-Israel sentiment. Robert Gabriel. Now, Robert Gabriel is the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, and he does not have a huge bio that I can get my hands on here. So he was a speechwriter and a former television producer, and he was the United States Deputy National Security Advisor along with Andy Baker since May of 2025. He was also policy advisor for Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. He was named in 2017 to Stephen Miller's staff as a special assistant. Okay, so here is where we can find out a little bit more about who Robert Gabriel Jr. might be. So he worked for Stephen Miller. I mentioned Stephen Miller, it might have been, I think it was last week, because Stephen Miller, he's a top aide to President Trump, and he was the one who said early January, nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland. That would be crazy. He said, we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time. So that there is those are your founding board members. And there are other people, the Gaza executive board members, that's Hakan Fidan, Turkish foreign minister, Ali al-Thawadi, a Qatari lawyer, Major General Hassan Rashad, head of Egyptian General Intelligence, Reem al-Hashimi, UAE Minister of State for International Cooperation, Nikolai Madanov, Bulgarian diplomat and former UN envoy serving as High Representative in Gaza. He's the closest to a friend of Palestine that there is. Yakir Gabe, an Israel Cypriot billionaire, and Sigrid Kaag, former Dutch deputy PM and UN coordinator. So the Board of Peace has no Palestinians on it. Davos was interesting. It was an interesting show. It was an interesting piece of theater. And I really think that right there we had it. As Alan said, hey, you used to call these folks gangs. That's easy to understand. All right, take care.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 31st of May 2020, and I hope you're all just hanging on and hanging in, but not hanging yourselves, hopefully, during all this chaos caused by the reaction to a virus. And as time goes on, of course, we're watching more pandemonium being created as part of this ongoing revolution that we're living through. The revolution was written about at the United Nations. It was written about from the Rockefeller Foundation. And it's been written about too from the Club of Rome and the World Economic Forum, constantly telling us that we'd have to go into sustainability for a new world order. And by the way, the United Nations has come out with an article called the United Nations New World Order, for those that like to joke about it. But they say it themselves. They always say it themselves from the horses' mouths, just like George Bush Sr. and Jr. both said the same thing. But everyone else is taught to just laugh at anybody mentioning it. Isn't it strange how this idea of conspiracy theory works on those of low intellect? They always jump at, it's a conspiracy theory, even though you can give them the exact same quotes from, and even the videos, in fact, from those who say it and bring it out at the very top, and presidents, for instance. But it doesn't matter, as I say, facts don't matter in this system we're going through right now. But we're living through it, and they keep telling us, look, you won't listen to us. You've got so many minutes to midnight to stop the world from just going into self-destruct with too many people, too many of you, actually. See, all of you, the peasant class. And everybody below a baron and a sir and so on was basically a peasant. And that's most folk, even the folk who think they're middle class, because they can go down just as quickly, believe you me, if they're not necessary. And again, you got to look into the past to get to the present and into the future. And George Orwell, of course, summed that whole thing up in 1984. Because they controlled the past, and if you control the past, you can control the future and the present, in fact. In the present, you can rewrite the past if you want to as well, which they do all the time. We're living through this in fact, there's never been a time like right now with this COVID lockdown and the complete censoring across the whole internet and social media by the new information czars, unelected czars, and a totalitarian system. Naturally, it really, really is. But you can watch articles disappearing in real time when you're looking them up, if you can even get to them, because they shadow ban and you time out and all that, try to get to different articles that have been there for years. And they just disappear eventually, rather quickly, in real time, as they go all out with this war on free speech and free thought and free exchange of ideas. You can only get their ideas that are authorized at the top from the czars and their teams, but not from anybody else. or even from yourself. I've looked up stuff I've said in the past myself. I can't find it either. But there you go. It's quite amazing, isn't it? The times we're living in. It doesn't surprise me because I've been waiting for it for a long time. Because I did study, and I really did. I didn't, not like the person who copies my bio. I really did study from a very early age, and went to the library and found the old books and so on. Excellent libraries they had in Britain, in Scotland, and especially in the old reference libraries. Even in school, you could dig up some because we didn't chuck the books out then. They didn't have what they call the weeding, the social librarian weeding that they have today, where they weed out books that are now politically incorrect. You had different versions of history that were more in tune with what really happened at the time when I was in school. And right down to money, it was fascinating when you're about 7 years old or 6, and you start thumbing through a school textbook meant for young children, very young, about money and armies and empires. Because empires just don't come out of nowhere. It's going to have structure and management and an organization to manage it all, right down to quartermasters and so on, that dealt with supplies for the armies and so on. And where'd they get the money from? Well, they told you in the book, and it went right back into ancient Rome and before, and it's fascinating to see the peoples who went along with the armies and dished out the food and kept accounts, and then went back to the emperors in Rome and so on, or the Senate, to get all the money paid back to them. Nothing's changed. It's just astonishing. Life is really rather simple, because it all comes down to economics, eh? And we've been living in an economical system, like a monetary economic system, for an awful long time. So far removed from any natural little tribal collectivist society. The collectivist society they're trying to bring us in today is a global society, but it's a socialist type, run by really those who are the successors of Marxism. Maybe the third or fourth generation of Marxists, and they call themselves progressives now, if you haven't figured it out. And they use all of the techniques that Marx talked about using, and then they were refined again by Trotsky, and then with the revolutionaries in America too, like the Weather Underground, and so that further restructured how to have revolutions and fragmented revolutions within society of different groups all combating each other to get to a particular goal, and how you create it and use it. All that kind of stuff's going on right now to an amazing degree across the planet, and folk never figure out who's behind it. They've got little clues where you see certain people's cropping up all over the place, just like now we do when you look at the CDC. And you can see Fauci at the CDC. You can see Fauci too at the Institute, of course, for infectious diseases and allergies and so on. And we see Fauci again dealing with the WHO, with the WHO, and so on. It's the same names cropping up all over the place, and again it's Fauci who decides what medications you're going to get, and he advocates who they're going to be. And there's definitely what you would call it, he's not impartial. He's not impartial enough to be advising what we should have, since he's too closely affiliated with these companies, these corporations, that are going to churn out the medications and the vaccines and so on. I mean, at one time we used to call these folk gangs. It's much better and pleasant term to use. It's very short, gang, quite easy to understand. And in the gang, you'll have the leaders of one part of the gang, but specialized lieutenants that would deal with other facets, like, for instance, vaccinations and so on, and big pharma companies. And then other ones that would deal with the government. We call them fascism, really. When it's fascism, running government, it's really making sure that governments and agencies work together with the government, technically, to make everything to work together, to make it work. But in reality, is to force it upon the public. That's what fascism really is, when governments are in bed with big private corporations and the money boys at the top that dish out imaginary money It's not even just paper or plastic anymore. It's just blips on the screen. A good magic act. A really good magic act. But we're living through amazing times through magic, isn't it? Because most folk haven't a clue what's real anymore, what isn't real anymore. Let's get back to revolution, right? And the New World Order of the United Nations and sustainability. And again, the World Economic Forum. All these big groups all attend the World Economic Forum, all the corporations, all the top members of the WHO, the CDC, the Club of Rome, and every other group out there that runs their lives, and Rockefeller Foundation and so on. They all go to this WEF, you see. And they decide, with the futurists, how they're going to run the next part of their agenda. Not our agenda, because we don't have one. But they follow their agenda. It's forced upon us. And it's announced to the public just like it comes down from heaven. Even the idea of the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, in Davos, you always think of it in the mountains, you see. You get a picture in your mind of the mountains, and just like in ancient times in Sumer and so on, and they'd put food up into the caves and the hills and that, because that's where the gods lived, you see. And they put the food up there and asked for the blessings, and it was always upon high, something above you, you see. But today you imagine it too, like the Ultima Thule of the high Nordic mountains you see in Switzerland, and way up yonder they all meet on the top of the world, the World Economic Forum. And the overlords, none of them are elected, of course, because they've conned the public that somehow they're a natural appendage to government. They graft themselves on. But they go there and they decide your future. I'm always astounded how folk can say, we're democratic, we're progressive. Well, progressing towards what? Right? Whose progression are you progressing towards? Because you certainly are not told, most folk aren't told about it. The leaders of all the radical groups are well paid and funded. I mean, they get salaries as like CEOs of corporations, a lot of the leaders of these radical groups, you know. If you don't know that, they get lifelong pensions and everything. Incredibly well organised. And if you think they're not part of the Mossad, the CIA, MI6, you better think again, because this strange organisation called the CIA has been running the world since the end of World War II, really. And overthrowing countries and nations and plundering countries too for the rich men in their own countries. This is how empires really work, you see. But yeah, back to Davos, and you're thinking about them, and they're way up there having their meeting, and they're having big, massive, it's incredible. Never mind the money that gets them there, and the money, it's not meant for the average Joe. It costs a fortune to get a hotel for the night, or a room, or even a little slum for the night, I suppose. You maybe bribe the person to get a St. Bernard out the kennel, and then get in there for the night. But no, it's for the rich, you see, and they don't want the peasants around there. But they decide what they're going to do in agreements, and they draft. And again, by the way, most of these big corporations have got their hands out to governments for handouts and public-private partnership deals, energy commissions, all these kind of things. And so here we are. The people who are going to pay for it all are the general public of the planet. We're not allowed to we can't get there, you see, and get a ticket to get in or in. But these people at the top that live off of us, like parasites at the top, with their big think tanks and their big bureaucracies, just like civil servants for each company, that's what they have, decide how we're going to live. And of course, they'd always make sure that we're going to be dependent on what they actually have and what they preside over, you see, whatever, like energy supplies and all that kind of stuff. And we're supposed to all follow along. And most folk do. They never think about it at all. They think it's somehow natural. You know, I mean, if you suddenly notice a third arm growing out your chest, would you think that was natural? Well, how come these organisations just appear, you know, And then you hear it repeated on the news, and you'll see important people there, and you think somehow it's quite natural that this new appendage to all is making decisions that we're all going to have to live by or die by, you see. And strangely enough, just like Bill Gates, and just like the Lucky Gene Club, I like to call it, because that's what they used to call themselves, the nickname for them, when they'd meet together, the eugenicists, the richest people and all that, and the influencers of society. Oprah was a member of it too. And the Influence Society, you see. They're the persuaders, you see. But here they are, the same people are the WEF, and they're quite open about their agenda. Too many people. And so what we've got to do, and the UN repeats the exact same stuff, because it's one clique with a lot of faces, folks, like the different departments, United Nations. It's the same group, really, with different faces, Forget Janus. You see, Janus is the old God idea, and much more than just that, of the one who looks forward and rules in front of them and sees and rules, but also behind him he's got another face looking backwards as well. If you can imagine just a circle of them with all different kinds of names, looking outwards and inwards. And you've got the WEF, and you've got Club of Rome, and you've got all the different organizations and all the big foundations there. And you have also the big top corporations all around it as well. The education committees and the UNICEF and blah, 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 blah. It's just a club with specialized branches, that's all. But they all meet, and they're all on board with the same. Too many people, too many of you. And they would like to bring down the population of the planet to fit their goals of a wonderful future for themselves and their own progeny, you see. Their progeny is worth it because they have better genes than you. And they know that. If you look into the eugenics societies and how they formulated the better types and inferior types. And the better types, you can't just join their club. They were quite brazen about what it took to join their club. You had to prove that you and your mother and your father had at least 7 generations before you of good breeding, you see, who'd always interbred with the better families, and had the proper, and they kept on the straight and narrow. They didn't go into drugs or booze or whatever. They kept an even keel in society, and they had their children, and they would run the militaries, they would run the armaments companies, they would run the big corporations, all that kind of stuff. But they'd always marry within their own groups, and they were they were sticklers about it, keeping tabs on genealogies in the families, to see if there were any bad genes, or, 7 generations ago, Uncle so-and-so was a great-great-uncle so-and-so was a bit of a lush, and things like that, you see. And they literally talked about that. They actually talked about that in their little meetings, and their little tittle-tattle behind each other's backs, because there's always a bit of rivalry amongst them at the top, you see. But they all knew each other's families' histories. Astonishing. That's how the British upper class were. And the British upper class often had kind of immigrated into the country and married very, very, very broken down lords and so on, who lost their money through gambling and because they were not fit really to run anything. But nothing's really changed. You see, that's how the eugenics societies were formed. And I've mentioned it before with the histories of Charles Darwin. And he was one of many, his family was one of many families that were already practicing specially selective breeding within certain families that they claimed, or they really thought, through their constant checking of genealogy, that they had the better chance of a more superior offspring than the general population that married it because they liked the shape of some girl's ankle, back in those days. And so they'd arrange their marriages. Yeah. There's many ways to look at it, because psychopaths can also marry psychopaths, or the offspring of psychopaths. And it's true, they've done studies on that too, and found out that going way back, you could find that the really nobilities came out of warrior classes that were really families that started to slaughter families round about them. You had a big family, you see, and you start slaughtering, you take them over, and all the peasants underneath them then were yours. And you got a bigger base to draw an army from, and you'd build it up and build it up. But the leaders, you would marry some other psychopath's daughter, you see, another warlord's daughter from either your own country or a different country, and amalgamate. You see, that's how the accumulated wealth and so on. It's quite an old history, but that's how it used to be for many, many centuries. And we saw it too, going way back into the pharaohs, where they often married their sisters, for instance, to keep everything. You had the proper blood, right? So you didn't want to marry inferior blood, and so you call yourself a god, and you'd marry your sister, the goddess, and have children, little goddesses and gods and stuff. Maybe it's godlings, for little ones. But anyway, it's interesting to see how it's always been much the same. And even when they tried to put a scientific spin on it, like they did with the Darwins, and the Darwins just married for generations into the Wedgwood family. They're well known for their ceramics and pottery and so on. But they kept marrying, and so much so that I think it was when Charles's wife died, he then married his wife's mother or sister or something. But all they did was marry into the same families over and over and over. And of course, then you end up with unfortunate traits as well that are very predictable. Because all of the Huxleys too, who were also related to the Darwins later on, you'd find they'd all have terrible headaches and things like that, and depressions. Even Julian Huxley used to have depressions, came on him. But they got it all too from Darwin's bulldog, and of course that was Thomas Huxley. It was. He was called Darwin's bulldog. He took over when Darwin died and pushed the whole idea of eugenics and superior breeding and giving it a scientific slap instead of the usual blue blood stuff, to make it more scientific. If you quote things in science or the terminology of science, it seems more real and more genuine. Put it that way. Credible. So that's what they use for it. So right down to the day, you find the same things going on. The same people, right? The same people with the same agendas that they had centuries ago, who now believe it's time to have the great leap forward and get rid of all the peasant stock that they don't need anymore. So much so, they say they could even recreate a peasant stock genetically if they really had to. It isn't just, you've heard about the Arks that they have, right? And back in the 90s, gave talks on this, about the Arks that they have. They have one in the States in Louisiana, and another couple inside the States, other ones across the world. But these scientists, and they have scientists in charge of them lifelong, these Arks. And it isn't just seed for plants that they have. They actually have the semen and the ovum of different animals, all animals and humans, by the way, in cold storage. And every so often they take them out of cold storage and will bring and actually fertilize them and then insert them into other mammals. They have all this documentation. It's fascinating. And they can actually bring whatever mammal is to term by using a different kind of animal as a mother to bring it to term. And they've been awfully successful. And years ago, I put up links on the documentaries that were put out about them by themselves, because they did that back then. And they said it was for a great catastrophe, like an end-of-life extinction experience that could happen. And they gave all the different scenarios, like a nuclear war or again, a disease that would wipe out most of humanity, where the elite would live underground and blah, 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 and survive. But then they could come out and then repopulate the planet, including a working class stock that they could basically create there from sperm and ovum that was frozen. Just astonishing what they've done to make sure that they can survive for themselves, you see. It doesn't matter if most of the people just perish. In fact, they'd be quite happy in this day and age if most folk perished. And they're rather outspoken these days about that. But now it's always put under sustainability. It's for the good of the planet, you know. And it's for good for the animals. Just too many folk competing with animals and yada, yada, yada. So it sounds, again, all scientific. It's always for the betterment and the good of something, you see. Whatever they do to you. It's always for the good, the greater good. And they never come out and says, we just want to get rid of you, for goodness sake. So they couch it in nice, cozy documentaries and things like that. Nice, wonderful. We're here to help you. And bring on different university graduates or professors that dedicated their life to helping. You just don't realize that. No, it wasn't for the money, it wasn't for the power and all the prestige, and it wasn't so that they get picked for survival for themselves when the rest of us go down the tube. No. These professors, they come out openly now saying it's time that the people around 65 just died and took euthanasia. Like the professor in Australia, they trot him out every few years, you know. They give these talks on television, apparently. I've only seen clips that folks sent me. But he gets all the publicity he wants because he's a spokesperson for those at the top. And they do their best to persuade you. It's for the greater good, you know. That you should collect that pension. And you've had a good life, you know. You've watched lots of television. They give you lots of good TV programs to watch most of your life. That's what you did with it. And then you emulate what you saw on TV, and if you didn't have any children, you were really good, you see. But even if you were very good, they still want you to just self-annihilate at the age of 65, leave the pension money, because the government then could use it for good scientific endeavours for the future of the planet and those that are chosen to live on it. So this is how it really is, folks. I'm using a bit of a satire to put it across, but the satire is completely loaded with the truth. You're so used to being talked to like a child. And you can present anything through a good documentary using psychologists and behavior. You can put something across in no time at all and have most of the folk having tears in their eyes, and at the end they'll say, okay, yeah, you're right, okay, we do sign on for elimination at 65. I'm not kidding you. It can be done. It can be done. You have no idea the power of the television. And George Orwell talked about it too, you know, that the TV could convince people of anything and to do anything or behave in any way that they wanted them to. Yeah. It's been done. But the folk don't know. And so getting back to the third arm sticking out their chest, and what's that thing called, the World Economic Forum? Well, again, you don't vote for it. It just created itself. The rich folk of the earth create it for themselves. And you don't matter, you don't count, because these are the ones who are going to make the changes in the world. Not you little peasant, and all you do is change the channel on your TV. But these folk literally decide what you're going to get in TV and what you're going to believe and not believe, and how you'll behave, and what's good behaviour and what's bad behaviour. And what they're going to teach the children. Yeah. Not to have any children either, you see. Good. Yeah. But you can, unfortunately, it's so true. You're so well understood, as I've said so many times, and studied more minutely than any animal or ant has been studied. And more, there's studies going on, even now under the COVID thing. We look at the billions getting thrown at different endeavours of university psychological operations and so on, and studies and all kinds of things to do with us during this pandemic. It's just astronomical. It's amazing. It's amazing. Because you see, that's how you rule the world, is by understanding the peasantry. And to if you put if you get the peasants in a room and you walk the tiger into, they'd all freak out right up. Naturally, it's a natural response, you see. But they find other ways of doing it that won't elicit the same kind of fear. They could train you to go up and cuddle that tiger. You see, if they wanted to do that, yeah, sure they could do it. You've seen the people. I've done the articles years ago. There's a woman, and I think was it Canada or was it Alaska? I can't remember. But she took her 2 children. She was a greenie, into greenie, hugged the trees, and Disneyland makes you love all the animals, you see. And her daughter, when they saw a bear, her daughter ran towards it, and the bear swiped her and killed her. And the son went to try to help the daughter, and he got hit as well. And then a few days later, they talked to the mum. And she says, I don't want the bear to be put down, She says, it's not the bear's fault and so on. And the saddest thing was she couldn't see it was her fault, because you don't let children go and run towards cuddle bears in the wild. Anyway, I mean, that's it. They get that from TV. They really think it's a cuddly Disney World out there. These animals, have you seen bears fighting each other? Whoa. You won't want to be around it. Each swipe could put whole slashes through a house in seconds. Just woof, 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 woof. They wouldn't even notice it, the bears. So you don't go and cuddle them, They're wild animals. Leave them as they are. And give them a good birth. They'll give you a good birth too in the wild. That's how you do it. But no, you can convince the people of anything, and unfortunately, it really does work with the people. They're almost ready to sacrifice the children and themselves to the nice bears. You understand? Don't look at any particular problem or event in one direction, unidirectional. Look at it from different angles. Because there's many things you're seeing at the same time there. How did that mother allow the children to do it? Why did the mother allow them to even go and run towards it? What was the mother thinking? What was her impression of what a wild bear's like? Where did she get that impression? Now, if you pushed a child towards a bear and it got mangled, you'd be up in a charge. But to train children to run and want to cuddle bears in the wild from television, nobody gets up in a charge for that, do they? That's the power of persuasion, again, through very, very expert videography, coupled with the soothing voice. You always have these soothing voices talking over in the documentaries they churn out. Canada's quite amazing for the women who do these documentaries. You never see them generally, but there's certain ones with a certain voice and accent they use, and Canada is famous for using them for 25, 30 years. And they talk in a certain, it's not a monotone, but it's lower than the average woman's voice, and they can talk at a very paced like that, hypnotic, and a little bit of music at the back there to put you into the alpha state, and which is hypnotic, you see. And TV will do that for you, go into alpha state, and then the voice is just hypnotically paced and mentioning and you're getting sucked into it, and with the music and the tempo of the music, which will vary according to the scene. And when they give you the nasty thing of a poor bear that's lost his home because someone's moved in that area or whatever, then the music will change, and dun to this man, dun, you see, and then they'll show you a clear-cut part of a forest from the 1950s, which they don't do anymore. But they always show the same thing when they want to train the radicals, a radical generation like the Antifa movement. That's what they brought up on in school. Make sure they see that kind of, oh my God. There you go. It really works wonders, doesn't it? Really does. You always create the society you want for the next 20 years. You start now for the ones you want in 20 years' time. They'll be young adults and fully trained, fully indoctrinated. They'll have a common opinion for every topic. They'll have the same uniform opinion because they've been trained that way. There's never been a time in history when you have so many people at the age of 20 all saying the same things, believing in the same things. It's never been done to this extent before. Before they've tried it for revolutions, they know it works, and you train them for the Bolshevik revolution. You make things as bad as possible with wars and famine and so on, to make it worse so that folk will revolt, and you train them that you're going to work for a better utopia for the future, and they jump on it. The young always fall for the same things, you see. They never realize that once the revolution's over, those who really wanted the revolution to occur go after the leaders and annihilate them. That's standard. For those, it's a little warning for those who are doing it right now. They don't realize this. But that always happens. And you find too that Bezmenov, who was the ex-Soviet spy that came out in the 70s and 80s and talked about it, and the cultural espionage. It was cultural espionage. It was successful. That's all you had to do, was destroy the culture. The Frankfurt school knew that too, but but Bezmenov said that the leaders that agitate and do the agitprops and so on, and they do the organization for the riots and all that, they really think that it's going to be a wonderful system. But when they find out the conquerors don't give them the wonderful system, that there's a different agenda there, they start complaining, and so they get wiped out because they won't shut up. That always happens. But that's what we live in. It's a world of constant intrigue, run by powerful institutions, well-funded institutions, so well-funded, in fact, that most folk are completely misled as to who runs it all. That's a beautiful trick of, say, the CIA. It has so many revolutionary forces across the world on the go, all age groups too, that and always disguised under political reform parties or revolutionaries or whatever, that the folk never catch on to the true functions. Even the folk who participate and actually do the fighting never really catch on. And that's why you have the old movies and even modern ones about the disillusioned freedom fighter when they find out it's all bogus. Everything's run by the masters of disruption. Because that's how you have control, is by causing disruption. You guide the disruption. You cause it to happen. You guide the outcomes of where you want it to go, the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And you can't fail by doing things that way, you see. Can't fail. It's done all the time. But the beauty of it is that it's so well camouflaged that even those who participate never really catch on to the bitter end as to who's really behind it and what it's really for. And to get great change for those who rule the world already, you must always plan the change, manage all sides to force the change on them, and all combating forces too, and then bring them into the new system that you planned at the very first, because it wouldn't have happened by itself. Folk are quite happy generally by the way things are. Even if they moan and they complain, they're generally quite happy the way things are. And you see it now with the agenda for the whole 21st century, with its different parts, 2015, 2030, etc., different segments of it, where things must be accomplished in each segment throughout this century. They mean it. They mean what they say. And you have to go back to the old idea of no private property. No private property. I used to get kind of excited when I realized that Freemasonry, for instance, the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and Albert Pike talked about it was the curse of private property. And then you found that Karl Marx, of course, wanted the abolition of private property and marriage as well. And so they give you what they'll call as a slightly different, a more watered down version. We'll just call it socialism, national socialism, which is just the same thing again. It gets you it takes a longer trek to get there. That's what Stalin also said. That he said, what is socialism? What is communism? He says communism is socialism in a hurry. Just a quick revolution, and then you've got it. Then you can call yourself socialist if you want to, but you've had the revolution. Whereas the Fabian Society, set up in Britain and funded by the richest folk on the planet at the time, like the Astor families and others, they're all part of it, and Rothschilds, because they own all sides. You got to own all sides if you want competing and conflicting parties that will fight and push and argue to get changes, because you plan the changes. And you get them to argue it out in parliaments and so on, this party versus that party, and you bring the desired conclusion along, you see. That's how it's done. Folk never catch on to it at all. But the Fabian Society literally boasted, if you get the old books from it, when George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells were the top members at the time, amongst others, of course. They had lots of correspondence with the Soviet Union, the early Soviet Union too, and they boasted they had a direct line to the desk of Lenin and then Stalin, and then of course then Trotsky, and then they had a little tiffs. You can still see the old letters from Trotsky addressed to them if you bother to read through them. Most folk don't read this stuff, but it's interesting to see the slanging matches. We've got a slanging match where they'd criticize each other because Trotsky wanted instant rebellion and stop this playing the political game to achieve your goals by the Fabian, meaning the slow technique. Just have a revolution, but they wouldn't go along with it. They were tempted at times to try and go along with it, but they didn't think they'd get away with it at the time. And they couldn't get the public ready for revolution so quickly. So they did the same with Germany, of course. Germany, you find lots of articles put out by the top Soviets at the time, who, before World War II, and even leading up to World War I, they hoped to bring Germany into a revolution for communism. That's what we were going to do with Russia, with the Bolsheviks. And they thought by having a revolution, they tried a couple of ones which failed there. But when you read how they analysed the data when it all failed, they said that the German people, it says, even though they're mainly working class people, very robust and hard-working people, they just wouldn't fall for this idea of a communist system. A lot of them were still religious, by the way, in Germany. And so they couldn't get them to just overthrow their governments, and they really hated it when the Germans would take up arms when told to go and fight for the country. They hated them for the working class for doing that. I never forgave them for that. And of course, Britain also had little revolutions that they attempted at the time in London, and you can still see the old photographs of Winston Churchill in his big top hat at the time, with policemen standing with shotguns around a building near the quay in the Thames, where the communists had hoped to get revolution started, were holed up. But it's quite amazing when they were doing that. They always have the standbys, the trusty method of doing it, which is the Fabian technique of slow incremental changes. Until, after World War II, Britain went into World War II giving the excuse to the public, because you always get excuses, never the truth, of why they were going to fight Germany. But they were going to fight, supposedly, to save their way of life and their culture and their traditions and everything, And so they were going to fight National Socialism, which was Germany, the National Socialist Party. And at the end of World War II, supposedly the victors, that were worse off than Germany, in fact. Germany got on its feet far faster too, with economic aid from all the countries, and through the United Nations and the World Bank, they got Germany on its feet much faster. But Britain emerged from World War II as a national socialist country. The very opposite of what it was fighting initially. So you understand, you're taken for a ride when you lose your sensibilities and you start parroting propaganda, and you start believing in the propaganda. You've lost your sensibilities. You won't actually see what's really happening. And the folk don't see what's happening as they go through, let's save ourselves. They lose all sensibilities when it's panic mode, where it's a pandemic or it's a war. You're all going to die, give up your rights and freedoms, do what you're told, and starve yourselves through rationing and obey. And they all do it dutifully. They never fails. Hitler mentioned that too, so did Stalin. And Stalin was more vocal about it. The techniques work so well for terrorizing the public. Get them to obey you to save their lives, and then you do whatever you want with them. It never fails, but folk always forget. Most folk lose their sensibilities right off the bat. They really do. And then the Green Party, I've got her articles somewhere, it was quite a few years ago, in Britain, where she said that she looks back with nostalgia at the way her parents and so on put up with World War II and the Blitz in London, and they seemed so happy and resolute to get through it, even though they were on terrible rationing and starvation, but everybody obeyed the law and they did what they were told, and that's what appeals to those in power, when you do what you're told and obey them and put up with all kinds of hardships which you shouldn't be putting up with in the first place. Nothing changes. And what's that got to do with anything today? Well, you're going through it again. If you really think this pandemic just came out the blue, fine, you can toss that up in the air and argue about it forever if you want to. But the preparations for it certainly did not. And you can't, I keep saying this, in the 1990s, the Project for a New American Century, the PNAC group, that eventually got in with George Bush, and in the 90s, when they met more informally, even though some of them were in governments at the time too, they wrote the list out, the list of countries they wanted to invade and take over and plunder across the Middle East and so on, and Asia.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you."
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
I'm not going to give you his name.
So go through the countries again?
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran. So when you look at Iran, you say, is it a replay? It's not exactly a replay, but here's the truth, that Iran from the beginning has seen that the presence of the United States in Iraq was a threat. A blessing, because we took out Saddam Hussein and the Baathists. They couldn't handle them. We took care of it for them. But also a threat because they knew that they were next on the hit list. And so, of course, they got engaged. They lost 1 million people during the war with Iraq. And they've got a long and unprotectable, unsecurable border. So it was in their vital interest to be deeply involved inside Iraq. They tolerated our attacks on the Ba'athist. They were happy we captured Saddam Hussein, but they're building up their own network of influence, and to cement it, they occasionally give some military assistance and training and advice, either directly or indirectly, to both the insurgents and to the militias. And in that sense, it's not exactly parallel, because there has been, I believe, continuous Iranian engagement. Some of it legitimate, some of it illegitimate. I mean, you can hardly fault Iran because they're offering to do eye operations for Iraqis who need medical attention. That's not an offense that you can go to war over, perhaps, but it is an effort to gain influence. And the administration has stubbornly refused to talk with Iran about their perception, in part because they don't want to pay the price with their our U.S. domestic political base, the right-wing base, but also because they don't want to legitimate a government that they've been trying to overthrow. If you were Iran, you'd probably believe that you were mostly already at war with the United States anyway, since we've asserted that their government needs regime change. So, and we've asked Congress to appropriate $75 million to do it, and we are supporting terrorist groups, apparently, who are infiltrating and blowing up things inside Iran. And if we're not doing it, let's put it this way, we're probably cognizant of it and encouraging it. So it's not surprising that we're moving to a point of confrontation and crisis with Iran. My point on this is not that the Iranians are good guys, they're not, but that you shouldn't use force except as a last resort.
And we've been doing that ever since, actually. And they got little George Bush in there, and the same members, of course. And 9/11 happened. They even said it in their articles. They need something to get the first thing you must do is get public opinion on your side. You must get the support of the people if you want to go to war, you see. So they said they would need something on the scale of a Pearl Harbor event. Well, no one's going to complain about the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Of course, there's lots of things about that, but regardless, they did attack it. And that's what you need to get to go to war, you see. And bingo, I mean, literally, within 2 years, or 1 year, they got what they wanted. 9/11 happened. Well, luck for them, eh? They actually say to get all this agenda done, eh? You would need a Pearl Harbor event to galvanize the people to be behind you for war. And bing, they get it. They get it. And then all your freedoms get tossed, not just in the US, but across the planet. Everybody's in the same mode. Oh, we're all allies. Oh, let's all sign the same things into law. Let's use high technology to censor speech and monitor the people. Let's build big, almost cities to collect all the data and for everybody's chit-chat, etc., like the NSA and all the organizations they're using. I mean, and then you train the people not to mind it. And sure enough, eventually they get used to it. Do you ever wonder why folk put up with the Soviet Union for so long? They got used to it. We can get used to pretty well anything. You get used to it. Doesn't mean it's right or proper. And once you get, they know it too, that once you get, say, 20 years of constant surveillance and facial recognition and all thumbprints, iris scans, they can push it to the next step because they've all accepted it. It's normal. You normalize anything. It's a new normal. I came out with a new normal years ago. And here's another new normal you're going through now, because here's the second phase of it. And so at the World Economic Forum, you have all these big industries and the electronic companies, and all work with them. They're all part of, by the way, of the military-industrial complex, all these different ones that are going to churn out your bracelets and apps and so on for monitoring you for COVID and all that. Can you get out your house? Can you not get out your house? You've got to get this app, yada. These are the same people who are part of or that these people are part of the military-industrial complex. Each corporation that you hear is a part of it. And so they get big money from the taxpayers again, because you're in a fascist society, and then they make more chains for you, and you'll adapt into it as well. Well, I can't go, I have to go to that flight, I forgot to get my app upgraded for my immunity passport and blah, blah, blah. And that will be common phraseology given 3 years from now.
Here's a song for all the normaltons out there who still don't see what's going on, or just can't admit that they've been so wrong for so long. Play it for one. Well, you can call me any kind of theorist that you like. You can diss me with a vague old lazy second-hand soundbite. And I know it makes no difference, the strength of evidence I cite. 'Cause if you're not a liar, you're willfully blind and your head's not right. To stare into a hole in the ground, you only need eyesight. And when you're buried 6 feet down, you've no use for hindsight. They're building your future for you, one I know you won't like. They're doing it in plain view and in broad daylight. I know corruption and conspiracies, they don't exist in the world that you see. But just how open do you need things to be? Totalitarianism, that's what's bothering me. Could I put it more plainly? How can you still not see? Authoritarianism, intensifying so rapidly. And ever faster we slide while you stay on the wrong side of history. Get down! Well, you read all those media lies and you believe they're all true. And you feel that you're far too wise for them to all be fooling you. And of the plans your rulers openly share, you're unaware, you've no clue. You think that those who only work to abuse you work for you. You won't apply any critical eye to anything that they do. You never wonder where the benefits lie. You never add 2 plus 2. There's no end to what you'll suffer, no line in the sand for you. You don't care when any others are cancelled and banned. Will you care when it's you? Seems that there's no limits to the oppression you always continue to defend. Well, it might not be pleasant how this will end. Totalitarianism, that's what's irking me. And it's screaming in your smirking face, but you say that you don't hear or see. Authoritarianism, coming down so brazenly. Top-down total control of global society. In your digital prison, you won't defy or disagree. When defiance and submission